I'd like to introduce our panelists first. Diane Schanzenbach, is that? She just explained it to me. Schanzenbach. Schanzenbach. I tried hard with that. I apologize. Diane is the associate professor in the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern, research associate at the National Bureau for Economic Research, research affiliate at the Institute for Research on Poverty, and she studies issues related to child poverty, including education policy, child health, and food consumption. Was that better?
Perfect.
All right, good. Thank you. And her co-author here, Elizabeth Cascio, is here. Stand up, Elizabeth, please. There you go. We only can have room for one author at a time on the stage. Ariel Kalil is the professor at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, where she directs the Center for Human Potential in Public Policy. She's a developmental psychologist, which you'll know from reading her wonderful piece. And she studies how economic conditions and parents' socioeconomic status affect child development and parental behavior. My friend Belle Sawhill over there is the Cabot Family Chair and Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, where she's co-director. She's many, many things, but for this brief bio, where she's co-director of the Center on Children and Families, and her areas of expertise are poverty, inequality, social mobility, education, fiscal policy, and the family. And her.
Of this panel, then I'm mentally retarded.
I think I understand that. And her co-author, I think, is right here in the front, JooAnn Venator. Please stand up, JooAnn. Thank you. And then we have JooAnn Hsueh. I bet you I got that one right.
You did.
There
you
you
did
go.
get
Thank
it right.
you.
Thank you.
So the first five actually I introduced were authors of our pieces, and the next two are discussants. JooAnn is the Deputy Director of Family Wellbeing and Children's Development at MDRC, currently one of the lead investigators of the Supporting Healthy Marriage Project, an evaluation of marriage education targeting low-income, racially, and ethnically diverse married couples. And Linda, I think you've probably already been introduced.
I'm back.
No, she's back. And so, great. Thank you for everybody being here. With Belle, I think we're going to start with you. Why do you focus on unwed births as part of your anti-poverty strategy? Is the problem as it relates to poverty really about unintended pregnancies, or is it about non-marital births? And I'm also, I know I didn't give you a warning about this, but I'm also wanted to get you to comment as part of this on sort of alternative marriage promotion kinds of ideas that we've seen in the past.
Okay. Well, I think on the question of whether this is non-marital or unintended births, it's both. Because what we are seeing right now is that about half of babies born to women under 30 in the United States are being born outside of marriage now, so that's the new reality. It's almost a norm. But when we look behind that and say, why are so many of these young adults having babies outside of marriage? It's unintentional. They are drifting or sliding into this. This is not something they plan to do by and large. And so I think that we need, therefore, and by the way, many of these households end up poor. Almost half of single-parent families in this country are poor. Their poverty rates are 4 or 5 times as high as in two-parent families. And if we then say, well, what can we do about this? One option would be to say to people, get married. And a lot of people are in favor of that. Back in the George W. Bush administration, there were a number of marriage programs, marriage education and relationship education programs that were launched at quite a cost to the government. They have been very rigorously evaluated now, especially by my colleagues' organization, MDRC, and they've been found to be wanting. They really haven't moved the needle in any significant way. So I'm not sure the government knows what to do about the fact that marriage as an institution is really kind of disappearing from young adult lives, especially among the less educated. But the other thing we can do is at least try to align when babies are born to when women say they want to have children. And right now, that's not happening. Right now, according to these women themselves, most of these babies are either unwanted or badly timed. And this leads to all kinds of problems, not only poverty, but we have a long-term problem here. We have some new research that we've just completed. It isn't published yet. But since someone who's been very partnering with us on it is in the room today, I want to mention just briefly that it is showing that even if you look at what happens to these children long term, I'm talking into adulthood, because their mother's education may have been interrupted, because the mother hasn't gotten a good foothold in the job market yet, because the mother and father haven't yet aren't old enough and mature enough to have formed a committed relationship. For all those kinds of reasons, the lifetime incomes of these children are lower. They're less likely to graduate high school, less likely to graduate college. So this has an impact that's long-term, in addition to having an impact on poverty when they're very young.
So you propose a social marketing campaign. What evidence is there that can really work?
So social marketing campaigns are efforts to deal with people's behaviors where they are doing things that they themselves don't really want to do. I mean, we'd all like to be better at doing exercise, not eating so much, not smoking, et cetera. So there have been several attempts and several evaluations to look at that. Social marketing campaigns are very cheap compared to all the kinds of other programs we're discussing at this conference. Do they work? Yes. The so-called legacy campaign, which was the effort to help kids to stop smoking, led to an over 20% reduction in teenage smoking in a relatively limited number of years. We've had efforts to cut back on, to improve nutrition and cut back on obesity. Those have been evaluated and found to work. Melissa Carney and Phil Levine, who are here today, have done a really interesting piece of research on a television program. It was a reality program called 16 and Pregnant that showed young teenagers that it isn't so much fun to be a mother too early.
Was that on ESPN?
I
missed it. I must have missed it.
You know, and they did this very rigorous piece of research, and it showed that in a very short period of time, this program alone, this one program, was responsible for 1/3, I think I've got this right, Phil, of the reduction in teenage pregnancy over that period. So these things can work. They're cheap. They don't involve much government. And I would add, though, that we shouldn't rely on this sort of thing alone. When I talk about this in a broader context, I always talk about the fact we have to give young people both the means and the motivation to have children when they're ready to be parents. Giving them the means a social marketing campaign that educates them about their birth control options, where to get it, what are the most effective kinds, is it safe, et cetera. And I can go into more detail if you're interested later on how misinformed young adults are about this, why there's a real need here. But you also have to give them the motivation, and that goes to the opportunity structure and the education and training and all the other stuff that we've been talking about here all day. Yeah.
As persuasive as usual. Thank you. Ariel, you write, I think quite interestingly about the parenting divide, which was a new phrase which I found very provocative. But why do you focus on parenting intervention instead of other early education programs? There are many education programs, such as the preschool program we've been talking about, that have been shown to be effective. So why not just expand those programs rather than devote resources to a new approach?
Yeah. So because I think those programs are necessary but not sufficient. The gaps in children's achievement and behavior that we are so concerned about between rich and poor kids open up as early as we can measure them. At 18 months, we can see an important, significant difference in the cognitive development of rich and poor children, for example. These gaps are observable long before children will ever have the opportunity to participate in an early education program of the sort that Diane's going to talk about. And I argue in my paper that these gaps in children's development are correlated with the important and, I should say, growing gaps that we observe in the home environments that children in rich and poor families experience, the so-called parenting divide, which I characterize as the myriad differences in the way in which rich and poor parents interact with their children from the various early stages. We heard from President Clinton about the 30 million word gap. This is received a lot of attention lately, but we can observe in time diary data, in survey data, vast differences in both the quantity and the quality of interactions that rich and poor parents have with their children, which, as I say, are correlated with children's school readiness and with their opportunities for future development. And one thing we also know is just a sort of obvious fact that children spend vastly more time in the company of their parents and their caregivers than they do with teachers in a preschool program that they might participate in for half a day, part of the year. And I simply think that we cannot expect, given those circumstances, for schools to do all the work and to provide the supports for children to reach their full potential, and that we have to think about starting much earlier in the life course than the possibility that preschool or other early childhood education offers.
So I'm curious if you could go a little bit deeper into how these programs work, what you'd actually do.
I wish I could answer that.
Right. Or how you might evaluate what they would do.
Yeah.
And also about whether or not this is a government activity or they're non-governmental organizations that can promote better parenting.
Exactly. So, I mean, the big question before us is how can we support low-income parents to promote their children's opportunity to promote their children's reaching their full potential? Unfortunately, we have very limited evidence on this point. The landscape of parenting intervention is, I shall say, littered with programs that have proved to be not only costly, but also not particularly effective. And this is an important problem that I think we need to solve. We have some very well-known, effective programs that have proved successful in changing very particular kinds of important and costly parenting behavior like child abuse and neglect. And here I'm thinking of the nurse-family partnership, for example. But we have many more examples of programs that have tried to improve the home environments, tried to change the way that parents interact with their children that have not been so successful. Part of this problem, I think, is associated with our attitude and that the family is sort of a private arena of behavior, that there isn't a role for government to tell parents how to raise their children, when to talk to their children, how much to read to their children, for example. I think we have to confront that problem and get over that problem and figure out a way to make culturally relevant and sensitive programs that support parents to support their children's well-being. So I'm proposing that owing to these problems of a lack of parent engagement in many of the programs that we see, a lack of parent participation in the programs that are on offer, we have a real cost problem and a problem with inefficiency in many of these programs. Parents simply don't show up, or they come for a few weeks and then they drop out of a program that's meant to last 1, 2, even 3 years. My proposal focuses on charging a government agency like the Administration for Children and Families with developing a new innovation and evidence agenda. I simply think we were at the stage where we know so little that we need a lot more experimentation to figure out what will work, whether there are more cost-effective ways of doing what we're already doing, and a greater willingness to experiment and to fail in doing so. As I think there is a lot of room for improvement in just figuring out even a first-order question of what works and for whom.
Great, thank you. Diane, another divide that you write about between low and high-income children is access to quality preschool.
That's right. And the research is quite clear that providing low-income children access to high-quality preschool can really improve their lifelong outcomes. So to be sure that it improves their academic achievement, but it also spills over to real-life outcomes such as increased earnings, more likely to be employed, less early pregnancy, and a reduction in criminal activity. And so, research by Jim Heckman, the Nobel Prize winner, has found that providing access to high-quality preschool for low-income kids pays really high dividends on the order of $8 of return for every dollar spent in this endeavor. And a couple of other things to say about that. One is that investing in early life makes subsequent investments in terms of educational interventions and youth interventions, things like that, more effective because we've teed up kids to be successful. And we think that the mechanism for this is that not only are we teaching young children skills like colors and numbers and things like that, but we're also teaching them how to learn and these non-cognitive skills about how to get along with others, how to finish things that you start, how to do multiple tasks. That really is what's driving this.
So how does your proposal fit into recent moves by the federal and state governments to expand preschool access? And if preschool is such an effective investment, why not advocate universal pre-K?
Great question. So our proposal does build on the president's recent proposal to provide federal assistance to state and local governments to implement high-quality preschools. Currently, there's a wide variety of access across states in terms of the number of kids who are enrolled in preschool and the quality of preschools that they have access to. So what we try to do in this proposal is provide a really context-specific sort of laying out where to spend your next dollar depending on where you are as a state right now. So that is, how much capacity do you have to implement high-quality preschool starting next year? If you can't go full speed, where do we want to start? Where will the impacts be the largest? And what the research points to is the impacts will be the largest by moving low-income kids from low SES backgrounds from no preschool to a high-quality preschool. And we would expect smaller impacts if we move from no preschool to a lower-quality preschool. And again, smaller impacts if we moved middle-class kids who maybe are already attending some sort of a preschool to a publicly funded preschool. So we don't expect that $8 return if we, for every dollar that we spend on up the distribution. And so we really need to think about, given the context that a state is facing, where do we want to spend that next dollar?
So this is a more nuanced approach than just a wholesale universal pre-K. Build on what's in place and try to make as much improvement as you can.
That's right.
This is a framework that you lay out in your piece.
That's exactly right. We need to take the next step, and the next step looks very different in New York State than it looks like in Indiana.
Interesting. So, JooAnn, based on your real-world experience, is there evidence to support this notion that these child interventions are this powerful that they're amount to some sort of a kind of a panacea for improving life outcomes for disadvantaged children?
That's an interesting question. And I think the answer is that we really don't know quite yet. And I think what's important, too, is to reframe the question a little bit in that, we do know that there are these seminal studies, peri-preschool, abecedarian, that have shown these long-term effects on these outcomes like employment, earnings, educational attainment, and criminality, which is where the cost saving or the cost benefit kind of occurs. But we also know from the landscape of literature in early childhood that a lot of these interventions, they produce these short-term effects, but then they fade when children leave preschool. And I'm not saying that to be discouraging by any means, but I'm saying it because I think perhaps we're setting up the bar too high. And there's a real danger in that in terms of saying, yes, we think early childhood intervention is important. Yes, we think early childhood education is important. But I think there's a real danger in setting up the bar so high to say, when we produce rigorous evidence about this, if we cannot produce these long-term outcome effects, which we don't know yet because there have been very few studies that have followed kids for that long, then what does that mean? Does that mean we should stop investing in this? And I don't think that that's the case, but I think what we still need to learn is what are the kernels or the nuggets, the active ingredients of these programs when tested in these small scale settings that can be taken up and then delivered at scale. So when we have, like in New York City, for example, the expansion of pre-K, right? Can we ensure the quality of that care? And then what do we think about in terms of the issues in defining what quality is in those kinds of settings. We know that quality can be thought of as these structural components of early childhood education or even early childhood interventions with service providers providing care, knowledge-based or lessons or curricula to parents. So there's structural components. Is it one-on-one? How long is it delivered for? Are there teacher qualifications? Are there service provider qualifications? And we know that it sets a foundation, but whether or not that in and of itself is enough to dictate these long-term outcomes is not clear. And so they're measurable, they're highly regulated. We know we can define them easily, and that's appealing in some way, but whether or not that's enough is a huge question in the literature. But what we do know is that children benefit in these environments because of the nature of the learning experiences that they have, their interactions with others in that environment with parents, with teachers, with peers, with siblings. And so how can we kind of develop that in these settings in a way that can be systematic and at scale? And so we know the nature of early childhood intervention also is that the workforce in and of itself is generally low paid. Oftentimes there are qualification type issues, but we also know that there's high levels of stress, teacher burnout, and there's turnover. So given that context, what do we need to invest in early childhood interventions is really suggests to me one potential place that's a really great place to learn more and invest more is how can we continue to invest in that environment in that way. Another is thinking about the web of services and the funding streams that kind of go into and provide services in early childhood. So it's not like K through 12 where there's a system in place and an infrastructure, albeit not perfect, but there's nothing quite like that in early childhood. There are different funding streams at the state, federal, private funding streams. And so how can we tie those all together to kind of maximize impacts for kids? And one thing that intrigues me about Ariel's article, a proposal, is the findings from Head Start Ready Parent really suggests that if there's alignment across parenting interventions and early childhood education, that may be a promising way to move forward and where there's sustained impacts over time. So
Gotcha. Before we move on to Linda, Diane, you wanted to jump in here?
I did. I wouldn't want the audience to walk away, though, thinking that the only long-term evidence is from these model programs, these small-scale programs like Perry and Abecedarian. We have long-term follow-ups of Head Start that shows that there are positive long-term impacts. We also have long-term or medium-term impacts from the state-level programs in Georgia and Oklahoma that are model programs for the Obama proposal that finds that test scores are improved, up to 10 years after the introduction, after preschool. So it's not just these small, intense things that are showing impacts. And I'll point out that in Georgia and Oklahoma, these model state programs, the cost per student ranges between $3,500 and $7,000 per year. And so we're really talking about something that's not that much more expensive than some of the other proposals that were on the last panel.
Okay. Linda, you've managed very large institutions that do things like this. And so it's coming at it from an institutional point of view for a second. Looking at all three of these proposals, how do you think about the balance between funding programs that are successful but expensive and investing in innovations that's less expensive but with which there's less evidence to be collected? And also, add a little bit, think about programs like what Ariel suggests, where there's a research agenda to figure out what works. How do you think about balancing those as you manage one of these large organizations?
I think it's really hard in government to be sort of a constantly learning institution. We can get really comfortable running our existing programs and be involved in all of the drama and intrigue about who's getting what and who's delivering what and who's doing good and who's doing bad. And it's hard to sort of to take a step back and say, is that program doing good at all? And it's also hard to just create these opportunities for learning and innovation. And so in a way, you have to be very deliberate about that and intentionally create those opportunities. And so I'm drawn like what is a bee go to honey or whatever, whoever. Like I'm very drawn both to Ariel and these proposals because you want to know that as you're doing your work, you're creating opportunities for new incoming ideas, and you're testing and you're sort of exploring the margins and continuing to push yourself. And there is an element, and I think this is really what Ariel was saying, is that in many ways when we talk about early childcare, quality pre-K, we're talking about making up for the missing words. So already at age 4, it's a remediation. And so by really thinking from the get-go, how can we prevent the need for remediation? That's what's also appealing about thinking about parenting from the point of birth. So I think it is hard on the money and the politics. We actually went through this process in New York City where we wanted to improve the quality of our early child care. So this was both. It was an effort to integrate child care and pre-K. And what we didn't have a fixed amount of money. We actually got 25 million additional dollars put into the pool. So we had new money, but quality costs more than not quality. And so what we wound up doing was funding less slots. So with more money, we bought fewer services because we valued quality over quantity. And it was a battle royale. It was like unbelievable. And everybody kept saying, Linda, why did you do this again? Like exactly why did you subject the mayor to all these the attacks? And so we have the evidence, we know, and particularly if you're focused on where the greatest impacts hit, which is on the disadvantaged children. When we shrunk, we also shrunk, we moved the whole system that hadn't been sort of reallocated in 2 decades. We moved it deeper into underserved neighborhoods, which meant away from gentrified neighborhoods. And so there was just, politics like galore on every level. And so it's really hard to get to it, but it's important to do, and it's the right thing to do. The other thing to remember on early pre-K, around the pre-K is, in quality pre-K, full day is a barrier. Half day is the barrier. Full day would remove the barrier. And so sometimes I think that we miss getting to those most disadvantaged kids.
What do you mean by the barrier?
If you don't have a nanny to pick your kid up from a half-day class, you can't take advantage of it. So you're going to leave your child. You're going to leave it with the next-door neighbor, with grandma. You're not going to take advantage of that quality care program. And so, but that's another investment. You can serve 2 kids half-day, or you can serve 1 kid full-day. So these things are constant trade-offs. On the ad campaign, we know we have really clear evidence that hard-hitting soda campaigns make a difference on consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Hard-hitting.
How much did Mike pay you to say that? Coming up here?
No, it's big. It's they're really to do that, but they have to be right. You got to show for the tobacco. You got to show that black lung, beating, and it's disgusting. You got to show the soda turning into fat and dribbling down your face.
We can imagine. That's enough. We can imagine.
What do you do to prevent unintended pregnancies? The consequence is a cute baby. Like exactly, getting the ad campaign right is, I think, an extraordinarily difficult thing because it's going to run you up against a whole nother set of political and small p cultural issues and sort of I'd love to be on the creative team that designs that thing, Belle. I would really call me up. I want to hear.
Yeah. I will, don't worry.
Yeah. We actually, and Robert Doors, you probably know in New York City, tried this, and he took a lot of flack. It was a crying baby. The kid's face was like bright red and tears were coming down, and the caption said something like, this bundle of joy is going to cost you $100,000 by age 5. Do you know that? It's like, ring. It's like, and this time the ring is Linda, it's the mayor, who put that in the subway? I showed it to you, I promise. Blank. It's dicey.
I'm going to switch now to some questions for the group to talk about the proposals and their implications, but also I think simultaneously, just like before, there's some cards available for people to write their questions down, which we'll integrate into this question period. What I want to start with is any sort of card-carrying businessman has to ask about cost versus benefits. Again, I'll start with you and we'll work around. And how do you think about, and this was a little bit of what the question was I just asked you, but how do you think about the costs and benefits, or maybe it might be better to start with the authors in this and then comment when I think about it. How do you think of the costs and benefits associated with each proposal? Because there are very different kind of cost-benefit analytics and calculus in these proposals. Let's talk about how you three think about your cost benefits, and then we'll get a little discussion going about that.
I think our proposal really wins the benefit
Belle
cost
thinks
test.
she has the best. Why am I not surprised?
Not to be competitive up here. Actually, seriously, all of these things need to be done for different reasons. I think that the general point here is that, as Ariel emphasized, that it's important to think about that home environment, which might not be ideal, that is in turn motivating the out-of-home quality pre-K. My proposal is even pre-parenting, because it's saying wait to have a baby. It's your responsibility as an adult to wait to have a baby until you're more ready to be a parent. And government can facilitate that in various ways. But our specific proposal is very cheap. It's $100 million a year.
Is that for a nationwide program, Bill?
Yes, that's for a nationwide program. Now, it should go on for more than 1 year,
right,
but it also has a stop to
you
it, unlike these
5
programs.
Years.
5 years, $500 million. The benefit, we've done very careful, either we or other analysts have done very careful benefit cost analysis. It saves the government money. It almost immediately, because every Medicaid paid for birth costs so much more than it costs to help align people's behavior with their intentions where childbearing is concerned, to help them to become parents when they want to be parents and not before then. So it's very cheap, and it has a huge benefit cost. And the Congressional Budget Office has scored this type of proposal, not the social marketing campaign per se, but family planning waivers and things of that sort, as actually saving the government money to the tune of $10 billion or whatever. So this doesn't cost anything.
Right. Ariel, I know you have a more of a research agenda, but again,
yeah, I mean, my R&D budget request from ACF is far smaller, so actually I think I win.
Okay.
Should we have a vote later on in the audience?
So I'm making a modest request for $10 million a year over 5 years just at ACF for this particular kind of research exploration in particular. But let me just say something about the kinds of cost-benefit analysis I think that this kind of work will achieve.
Right.
And I think we can be saving a lot of money in the kinds of parenting programs that we currently offer, because right now we have a one model fits all, one price tag fits all. And I think we could actually be doing a lot of what we do for less money and putting more expensive programs towards people who need more intensive services, but differentiating a population into those who need a relatively light touch, low cost intervention to be successful. We can do this a lot cheaper than what we're already doing. These programs could be made a lot more efficient and achieve far greater cost savings. We just don't know yet how to differentiate between those two different, or 3 or 4 different kinds of participants in the kinds of programs we have. And I think that is one of the goals that my agenda would have on it.
But you probably you should also have in a research agenda explicit cost-benefit analysis.
Absolutely.
Each of these
Absolutely.
programs, right?
Exactly.
Try to figure it out.
Exactly.
Diane?
And of course, if we really target high-quality preschool, we've got that $8 for every dollar spent.
But you have to admit, you're the big spender here, aren't you?
Well, I am. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So we need some big benefit?
But $8 for every dollar,
Right.
we don't get that kind of return in the stock market these days, do we?
Well,
I don't.
no comment.
But
Yeah, I asked Mr. Altman about that later.
I would be an irresponsible economist, though, if I let you think that every dollar is going to produce $8 in benefits. And this is really where.
You made this point earlier, but you elaborate on that.
But I just want to make it again.
Please go
because
ahead.
I think it's the most
She's got
important
our National
one.
Bureau of Economic Research hat on
Exactly.
right
That's
now.
right. That's right. The higher up in the income distribution that we go, the less impact
Right.
we're going to see, especially in terms of improvements. What we really see up higher in the income distribution is it's a child care subsidy for parents who would already be sending their kids to preschool. Now, as a parent like that, I'm all in favor of me having that
Right.
That benefit. But when there are other things on the table, I wouldn't prioritize
Now,
that.
as I understand, I'm reading your proposal, and I might get this wrong, the highest impact is migrating from someone from no preschool education to the highest quality. That's obviously the least realistic to accomplish if you're in an environment where there's nothing and you're going to try to go to the highest quality, right?
Well,
So-
a lot of states have done it.
Have they?
A lot of
So
states have
start
done it.
off a program that's high, that has enough,
That's high quality, but
because the
it's
lessons
just,
learned elsewhere?
That's right, but it's just targeted.
So it's a smaller group of people.
That's exactly right.
I got it. So
That's exactly
that
right.
mitigates its broad social impact, also mitigates its spending, but still.
That's right, and it raises these political issues that were just discussed, but it still might be the right investment.
Got you.
I think we need to make clear that even though I agree that there may be an 8-to-1 ratio for early childhood education, it's not scorable in an immediate budget sense.
Right.
And therefore, in the kind of situation that
Right.
Linda's been in New York, or that anybody is in here in Washington, they're just not going to believe that, or even if they believe it, they're going to say, well, we just can't afford it right now.
Yeah, we're a little
And so that's a problem. And so I think we have to look at how long it takes to reap the investment. It's too bad we have to do that, but it's a reality.
Right, really institutionally penny wise and pound foolish. And I think, we're underinvested in this country on early care and development broadly. And particularly when we know what works, sometimes it just means that you both have to be willing to take the longer view and make the political decision to make the investments if you're serious. And the president really said, this is a serious conversation. This is the time to do it. We have to come up with bold agenda items if we mean to make a difference. And there aren't too many areas where we have great evidence that things really work. And early child care and development is one of them, which doesn't mean so go with what you know, be willing to make big investments, and be willing to look at the long term, but still innovate. Like, I think both of these proposals are extremely exciting. Like, I want you to get like 10 million a year. You shot way too low.
Anybody out
10
there
million a
willing
year.
to
You're talking about
pony
me
up the
now.
money?
And Bill, have you on the scoring? I didn't know about the CBO scoring. Is it on? Like, I haven't seen a campaign on this issue that's actually been, evaluated, on this very topic.
There have been 3 efforts at the one federal and 2 at the state level. The 2 ongoing at the state level are in Colorado and in Iowa. The Colorado campaign is still underway. I mean, it is a social marketing campaign.
But these are not the smoking campaigns. These are on this
These
point.
are ongoing
On this point.
social marketing campaigns in the area of reducing unplanned pregnancies.
Okay, got it, right.
And the one in Iowa is called Avoid the Stork. I got it right, JooAnn?
Yes.
And they've used humor. They have this awkward-looking
So
stork.
do storks have a political constituency that she needs to worry about?
But
Well,
they're
the kids
they're
wrapped inside,
moving
you
the
don't see
needle
them.
in Iowa. In Iowa, I'm not sure how rigorous the evidence is, but they have seen a reduction in unintended pregnancy following the introduction of the campaign.
Interesting.
And there's opportunities also for using more than big, expensive billboard campaigns. Kids are, addicted to their devices.
Oh, we have to go with the social media stuff that you and I were talking about earlier. And there's a wonderful website, if I may advertise it for a sec, called bedsider.org, where young adults can go to get all kinds of information, including where the nearest clinic is.
Brianna, did you have something you want to say about this?
I did want to add something. So just in terms of thinking about the cost benefits of some of these interventions, I think if we change the lens of, are we making a system-wide kind of effort to intervene and raise the quality? So system-wide change versus merely investing in an individual. So if we look at something like early childhood education and we say we're investing in the infrastructure of professional development and training for teachers, that training in a teacher will not affect only the cohort of children that are in her classroom or his classroom at that moment in time, but also subsequent classrooms that are coming through. So I know that's difficult to monetize, but at the same time, it's a different lens in terms of thinking about the cost benefits of some of these kinds of interventions, whether or not it's an individual versus system change.
So we're in Washington in the shadow of the Capitol, so we have to talk about politics for a minute here, even though Bob, who parented the Hamilton Project at precisely the right time, by the way, says we're not licensed to practice politics. But so, Belle, maybe you and you can talk a little bit about, before we open up the panel, a little bit about the political obstacles, because even though you're not a political type, you've been around this town long enough and you've served in government too. The political obstacles and the political feasibility of getting these things done.
Well, I just talked about the fact that because this is very low cost, that makes it more politically feasible.
Right.
However, I would be the first to admit that when you start talking about birth control, you get into trouble very, very fast. Linda's already said this.
Talked about this, yeah.
It's an issue in the political system, a huge issue. Witness the Congress trying to defund the entire Planned Parenthood operations all around the country. It's an issue because of cultural and other sensitivities. It's an issue because we are great big prudes in this country and we don't like to talk about sex and we don't like to talk about birth control. My friend Sarah Brown from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancies says everybody thinks about the ick factor when they think about sex. I don't know why. I always thought sex was kind of fun myself, but
I'm going to avoid extending that.
You asked me to talk about it.
I know.
It's getting
by the
late
way,
in
it
the
didn't
day.
cross my mind there might be some sensitive moments for me here today. Now, where was I? And let's think a little bit more broadly about not just your proposal, but the political feasibility and obstacles of all three of these proposals.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, nothing's getting done in Washington, right? Even if people agree, they won't approve anything that Obama proposes, even if there's agreement, because they don't want him to have a success. Right? And so by definition, everything is just so totally stalemated, totally roadblocked, and it's stunningly, stunningly frustrating. And so what I see is that the solutions are coming at the state and local level.
Anybody add anything to that? I mean, part of the problem, this is where the discussion always goes, is, we can't get anything done at the national level. It has to be done at the state and local level, or public-private partnerships, or foundation, or whatnot, that sort of thing, right? Is that kind of where we are in terms of the feasibility of getting any of these things done? Have you, any of these two other authors, thought about this? Because yours doesn't cost very much, right? And you
But
propose
I think
a funding
we
source
want to
for
think
it.
more broadly about one of the questions I posed, which is sort of philosophically, what role does government at any level want to play in asking parents to do something differently than what it is they're already doing? And I think that's a challenge we have to confront. I don't know, I certainly would not know how to do that, or how much it would cost, or how long it would take, but I think that's a very important challenge to be solved for the kind of work that I think needs to be done in this area. Hampered by the fact that, as it turns out, parents don't listen to experts when it comes to parenting. They listen to experts when it comes to thinking about things that are health-related for their kids, but not for their parenting behavior, how they should talk to their kids, how they should discipline their kids. So I think we have to think about also a different model of delivery in terms of, is this a government program? Is this a community-based program? What form do some of these parenting interventions need to take?
Gotcha. We have, say, only about 10 or 12 more minutes, so I think I might go to some questions from the audience. JooAnn, you mentioned that there's an interaction between early education and parenting interventions. Can the panel say more about that, maybe starting with you?
I don't actually have a whole lot more to say about that, except I think it's intriguing. I mean, I think what we know is that this kind of model, or we suspect, is that this model of a one-time kind of inoculation is not going to be enough. I don't know, you might
I
say?
have a little more to
Right.
say. There's evidence that the parenting component of Head Start improves parenting, and it makes a lot of sense to sort of incorporate Ariel's proposal into an expansion of pre-K, and especially as we evolve and we see potentially Head Start moving towards more 3-year-olds with a more expanded, 4-year-old preschool proposal, that might be another natural time to fold this in. Now, I know Ariel wants to start even earlier than 3 years old, but we do at least have some infrastructure and some evidence that harnessing the infrastructure works.
Yeah. I mean, I
Isn't
think
there
I
a
would-
parenting component in early Head Start?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think we want to expand early Head Start even more.
Well, I think that one of the challenges that Ariel nicely brings up in her proposal is that even though early Head Start might provide something like that, the challenge is that parents don't necessarily take it up in the numbers that we would need them to kind of bring about those benefits, even though we suspect that having synergies across what children are learning at home and doing at home and what they're doing in early childhood education settings can be beneficial. And so I think that that's the kind of the challenge for the field there, right?
This one says, for Ariel Kalil mainly. Please specify how parenting interventions can be used to also promote family mental health and social emotional development, especially interventions like home visiting programs.
So the typical kind of parenting intervention that I'm imagining actually does touch on a variety of things. Promoting parent wellness and parent mental health is the first step in effective and positive engagement with children. So I see those kinds of things as going hand in hand. I mean, there are very discrete kinds of parenting interventions where we might simply want to focus on, book reading, or talking, for example, to your kids before they can talk to you. This is critically important. But there's a whole range of family and parent interventions broadly defined. And let me also just say, there are many different types of caregivers in the home with whom children interact. So I'm not just talking about a biological parent or a mother in particular. I'm talking about the possibility of a set of important caregivers. So I don't. This is a part of what I'm thinking of, not anything I would exclude.
There's a really cool program going on in Providence. I think it's called Providence Talks, and it's thinking about how technology can be an opportunity for experimentation. It's essentially a word monitoring system that's used at home. And so somewhere embedded in the baby's clothes is a little microphone, and it's recording the number of words the kid hears over the course of the day. And it's showing a parent on a daily basis what the gap is. And
I bet there's an iPhone app too, right?
Right. You get to match yourself, and then there's games involved. But you want to think about like a hackathon. Well, why not a policy hackathon? But how also can technology come into this? And so this is being tested. It's a sort of really interesting thing, but it's a different sort of new ideas and different approaches to tackle this. And so if it has to be tied to a home visiting program because there's a coaching component. But why not create a coaching app? It's
Right.
so. Play around. Let's figure it out.
Some of this coaching can be done virtually, actually. There's some very interesting, innovative programs that are trying to do this, outfitting families with webcams and interacting virtually with a
We
coach.
do our doctor's office by Skype, doctor's visit by Skype. We can do a
Exactly.
coaching by Skype.
Yeah, and sex education for the 21st century, by the way, is all going to be online. And it's going to be much more effective than that very boring,
Yes.
dumb health class you got in 8th grade.
Yes. And Belle's going to be teaching it.
In my second life.
I might sign up. Diane, it says, some would argue universal pre-K programs are effective for low-income kids because they are universal. Because middle and upper income students also attend. How might targeting to low income kids alter impacts?
That's a great question, and one that I'm not sure that we have the research base to really answer adequately. It might be the case that having the middle class invested in preschool either makes it politically palatable, or having those moms involved in the system make sure that the quality is consistently high, or it could just be the peer effects that happen in the classroom, having middle-class kids in the classroom as part of the treatment there. I just don't think we've got great evidence on, especially this modern era of preschool expansions to really tease those two out. But we do know that peri-preschool, which was this
Right.
very targeted, did not include the middle class. Of course, that wasn't scaled up. The things that have been scaled up also included the middle class.
So in reading your piece, the peri-preschool was from 1960 something?
That's right.
Now how come, and there's some Head Start data, but how come nothing's been done in 50 years to try to measure those sorts of things?
I mean, that's a great question. There is a lot of evidence from the Head Start program
Right.
that happened subsequent, and there are pieces here and there. The Abasterian came a little bit later than that, and so on. So I think the evidence is sporadic until maybe starting in the mid-1980s.
Interesting, okay.
If I could just
No.
add to that, I think one of the problems we face is that we're all very committed to having hard evidence about the effectiveness of these programs, including their long-term impacts. But it takes 30, 40 years to get the long-term impacts. And in the meantime, a whole generation has grown up and several new generations have been born. So this is really not all that feasible as the only way to decide what works and what doesn't over the longer run. And that was what motivated me to build a life cycle model at
Right.
Brookings, which is a very data-rich model. It's not as good as a randomized controlled trial over 40 years, but you can do it today instead of waiting until 40 years to get the answers. And so even though the answers are a little rougher, they're a lot better than nothing, and they now allow us to test drive these kinds of interventions to see what their impacts might be on the lifetime incomes of the children and do an apples-to-apples comparison of comparing these different interventions in terms of their impact on lifetime incomes.
This work that Belle's done is really terrific. I recommend people have a look at it.
Thank you.
So this next question reminds me of something Bill Clinton once said, which is governments don't raise children, parents do. So for Ariel and Diane, what is your take on how involved the government should be in home life? Where is the line? And then there's a parenthetical bottom here, which I think I get this right. So for example, what about paying people not to have children and the cost benefit of that versus government overreach?
Well,
No, I didn't ask the question. I'm just reading it.
another thing, one of my favorite Clintons likes to say is it takes a village.
Right.
Right? And so,
That was the other Clinton, I guess.
yeah. No, so I think it certainly makes sense, that lots of different people have different stakes in this, and no one's talking about required preschool here. This is a voluntary endeavor, and I think that's very important. And you can always ignore the parenting advice as well. Ariel?
Well, let me just say, so also President Clinton mentioned Hillary Clinton's Too Small to Fail initiative, which I'm a big fan of, and is trying to kind of create a framework. For thinking about supporting parents to promote children's opportunities. One of the key things they're doing is simply promulgating information. There is a big information gap. Sort of forget about the behavior gap and the challenges of changing behavior, but in sort of basic understanding of child development, of the importance of and the rapidity of early brain development, of the importance of cognitive stimulation, as I said, before children can even talk, of the importance of communicating with them verbally. One of the things many different actors can do is promote good, solid information to families who don't have it. I don't think that's controversial.
Not with me.
Okay.
Anybody else on this? Belle, were you
Well,
about
I
to
would
say
say that, I would first of all totally reinforce what Ariel is saying about lack of information. And we forget that information is very necessary and very valuable. In the area that I'm talking about, I've been surprised after we've looked at the data on how much misinformation is out there. I mean, there are a lot of young people out there who believe you can't get pregnant if you have sex standing up. There are a lot of people who believe that if you had sex once or twice and you didn't get pregnant, that means you can't get pregnant. I mean, we always thought everybody knows about the birds and the bees. That's not the issue, but it is the issue, as it turns out.
That's
Or at least part of the issue.
That's interesting. So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative here.
Listen to the twittering. You see, that's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. We'll have to continue that conversation over a drink later tonight. So one question. Over the course of these 2 days, we're going to be talking about a bunch of different kind of policies and interventions, supporting disadvantaged teens, providing adults with skills, et cetera. We focused here on young children and parenting. For those of us who are parents, we realize that parenting never stops. It's not just when they're young. It's not even when they're out of college. You kind of are still hard at work in very different kinds of ways. So isn't this really a continuum of interventions that we have to do? And how do you think about that mix? And how do we decide, given that lifetime continuum of interventions and policy actions, where we place our bets, where we put our scarce resources?
I diversify the economy, long-term, short-term, preventive, and treatment. And so you want to prevent adolescent criminality, but you also want to treat it and prevent a lifetime of criminality. You want short-term fixes that can get you quick results as you invest in proven things that take longer to show results. I think and sometimes particularly when you're working in a political environment, when you have to deliver a political agenda, those short-term wins are really important to get the credibility and to continue to sort of sustain the public support as you wait more patiently for the other things that need more time to prove themselves.
Anybody else think about that?
I would say we need it all, to say the obvious, but there is some evidence that earlier is more important than later, simply because success through the life cycle is cumulative. And we have pretty good evidence now that if you're successful, if you're school ready, for example, at age 5, and our model that we developed shows this, if you're school ready at age 5, your chances of being successful at age 10, being able to read, do math, and have socially appropriate behavior at age 10 are doubled if you're school ready at age 5. And so if we can, and it goes on up the ladder, so that the more you can do earlier, the easier the job becomes later.
But JooAnn,
that doesn't mean you should ever stop. It just means that I think, and also our rough cost-benefit estimates of the different interventions through the life cycle suggest the earlier ones tend to be more cost-effective.
But
I hate to be too general about that, because there's always going to be some examples that doesn't fit, but as a generalization, I'm comfortable with it.
JooAnn, didn't you cite some evidence about some of these benefits are evanescent, that when the kids get older, they show on many edition no benefit from the actions taken?
I think there are some landmark studies that actually show that there are long-term benefits of some of these early interventions. And I think one of the things that would be really interesting to see from Belle's work is whether or not prevention of unintended pregnancies can change outcomes for families, like their educational attainment, their employability, their earnings. And I think that's kind of like the
We have a brand new paper on that.
Yeah, I would love to see. So it's kind of like that game-changing evidence that I think is needed to kind of understand that. And I think right now we don't have that evidence quite yet. But
So 4 o'clock, bringing this in on time. I recommend that everybody read these 3 papers. They're terrific, well worth reading, and I think they're available in the back somewhere, right? So no excuse. You take one home with you. So I'd like to congratulate the 3 authors for your papers and our 2 discussants for. So this concludes the first day of our summit. Tomorrow we'll have 2 additional panels, one on social program design and delivery, and the other on work sharing and the minimum wage policy. Registration begins at 8:30 a.m. Tomorrow's panel begins at 9:30. Thank you for coming.